Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We are listening to The Real Responders and its university football player found dead.
A university football player and his female friend are found beaten to death. Investigators piece together random fragments from the crime scene, hoping to assemble evidence that will point to the killer. A man is found shot to death in his living room. With no obvious suspect, investigators turn to those closest to the victim and uncover a startling secret. When killers are driven by jealousy and desire, their desperation is evident in both the crime and their efforts to avoid detection. But forensic science can reveal even the slightest mistake. To solve crimes of passion. Sultry Miami Beach, with its hot nights and warm days, is the perfect setting for romance. But when passion is one-sided, jealousy and rage can lead to murder. On April 16, 1996, University of Miami student Darren Thomas was returning to the dormitory he shared with star linebacker Marlon Barnes. Thomas saw that the tires of his SUV were flat. He had just loaned the car to his roommate. Annoyed, he wanted to confront him. When he went into the dorm, Thomas was horrified to find Barnes lying on the floor, covered in blood. He ran next door to call police.
Miami-Dade County Police and Fire, where's your emergency? University of Miami? What building number? Room number?
A patrol officer and an ambulance were immediately dispatched to the apartment.
Joined it. 332. University of Miami Athletic Dorm. Some actor, the subject fell scene at 1901. Kilo 315.
Paramedics entered the scene. Marlon Barnes lay motionless on the floor. He'd been severely beaten about the head and face. He was pronounced dead at the scene. In the bedroom, the officer found another victim. A young woman, also badly beaten. Despite efforts to revive her, the victim's vital signs remained weak. Medics needed to get her to a hospital immediately. Crime scene investigators arrived and began to carefully search through the apartment, looking for clues. It was eerily undisturbed, suggesting that robbery was not a motive for the attack. Investigators found splinters of wood and shards of metal near the front door. But the wood pieces did not seem to match any of the furniture in the apartment. It may have come from the murder weapon. They also also found fragments of teeth and bone, testaments to the savagery of the attacks. Investigators interviewed Darren Thomas. He identified the female victim as 22-year-old Tinwanika Lumpkins. Unfortunately, she too would not survive. Barnes had borrowed his SUV to attend a party at a Miami nightclub. He was not aware of anyone who would want to attack Barnes or Tinwanika. At the Miami-Dade Police Department, Detective Thomas Romani worked the case. From his early assessment of the crime scene, Romani knew the victims were caught by surprise.
We were able to establish that the attack was with a heavy blunt object, and it took place right at the front door. And it proceeded into the house, and the majority of the trauma sustained to Barnes occurred when he was on the floor.
The victims were autopsied in Dade County. The examination revealed that both victims died as a result of blunt trauma. Barnes and Tinwanika had been hit with such force that impressions of the murder weapon were left on their bodies. Medical examiner Sam Bellino noted the distinctive nature of the victim's wounds.
Marlon's wounds were predominantly clustered around his face. Some of them were T-shaped or L-shaped, or had some unusual contours to them that made me think that they were made with some sort of very specific weapon. Tinwanika had some pattern injuries, but they were subtle and they were different, indicating that either it was a different weapon, a different aspect of the same weapon, or possibly that the weapon had somehow altered, such as being broken between when she was assaulted and when Marlon was assaulted. But the bigger mystery in both of the cases was there a specific weapon that we could identify and match to these wounds?
The task of identifying the murder weapon would fall to the Miami-Dade Crime Lab. Thomas Quirk is a firearms and tool mark examiner at the lab. He studied evidence taken from the scene.
I could tell by looking at the wood that it looked like what's called a forend of a shotgun. That is a part of the shotgun that's usually held by the left hand when somebody's firing a shotgun.
The brutality and rage of the crime suggested the killer knew his victims. The next day, news of the campus tragedy stunned the city. Detectives would have to develop leads on a suspect. Investigators met with the victim's close friends and teammates. Barnes and Tinwanika were popular and well-liked by their peers.
The football players told us that Barnes and Tinwanika were seen together. Not all of the football players knew their exact relationship. Tinwanika was a friend of Marlon Barnes since they were in high school.
Miami-Dade police also discovered that Tinwanika had an ex-boyfriend, a rap musician named LeBrant Dennis.
LeBrant Dennis was a local from Miami. He had produced some rap videos, and in fact, that's how Tinwanika and LeBrant Dennis met.
Police were eager to question Tinwanika's ex-boyfriend, LeBrant Dennis. And they wouldn't have to wait long for answers. The day after the murder, Dennis and a friend showed up at the police station. Detective Romani was intrigued by what he found out.
When I met with him, he didn't have gangster, rough rat type persona, and I didn't pick up on it. LeBron was very calm. He was inquisitive as to what occurred. He told me that he didn't have any information about the case. He didn't have any problems in the relationship with domestic problems. He gave me some background information about his relationship with Tim Juanica, why they broke up. He, in fact, told me that he did not personally know Marlon Barnes.
Dennis and Tim Juanica dated for 5 years.
There had been some breakups between them through their 5-year relationship as well.
But according to Dennis, things were getting better between them. They were in the process of reconciling. He said he was asleep at his sister's house the night of the murders. Investigators asked to take photographs of his body. Police wanted to see if Dennis had any marks or scratches, signs of a physical altercation.
Thank you. Pick out your shirt, please.
But no visible scratches or bruises were found on his body. Dennis also agreed to be fingerprinted. He was acting like a man with nothing to hide. Even though there was nothing glaring, Detective Romani wasn't convinced.
When I was told that LeBron Dennis responded to the Homicide Bureau to speak to me, I wasn't really surprised, but I was apprehensive. Maybe that he was coming forward to be too helpful. It became clear that he was trying to be very helpful.
Miami-Dade investigators went to Dennis's home. He continued to cooperate. They conducted a thorough search.
We're going to ask that you wait by the door here.
Looking for anything that might be related to the crime.
Okay. Yeah, but just tell it. Is it the same young man?
They found nothing out of the ordinary. Detectives asked Dennis for the clothes he had worn the previous night. The clothes would be examined for traces of blood or hair and fiber evidence, but nothing would be found. They also searched and photographed Dennis's car. But again found nothing suspicious. Despite the lack of evidence, police could not eliminate him as a suspect. Detectives had to expand their search if they were to solve the double murders, and they would need hard evidence to bring the killer to justice. Detectives were struggling to solve the brutal murders of University of Miami football player Marlon Barnes and his friend Tim Juanica Lumpkins. Police considered Tim Juanica's ex-boyfriend, LeBron Dennis, a potential suspect, but there was no evidence to link him to the crime. Investigators went to the area outside the nightclub where the victims were last seen. At a 24-hour gas station, a clerk had seen a suspicious man wearing a hooded sweatshirt, pacing back and forth, watching the club across the street. All of this took place at the same time Barnes and Tim Juanica were inside the club partying. The clerk was concerned and called police. By the time they arrived, the man had gotten in a car and left. The clerk said she did not see his face. She gave a precise description of his car, recalling every detail, including the make and model, its tinted windows, and a missing rear license plate. Investigators showed the woman photos of LeBron Dennis's car. She didn't recognize it and was certain about what she had seen. Police needed to locate the car and its driver. They looked further into the background of Timwanika, trying to find a lead to someone who may have wanted to harm her. They interviewed a number of her friends.
It wasn't a mutual thing at all.
Detective Thomas Romani discovered that Timwanika's relationship with LeBron Dennis had been fraught with violence and stalking, a far cry from the mutual breakup that Dennis had described.
It was a very controlling relationship.
And as we spoke to more friends and acquaintances, we learned that Timwanika and LeBron Dennis had an argument early in the week, and she had left him. There had been some violent breakups and domestic violence between them.
Dennis said he was asleep at his sister's home when the murders occurred. Now, detectives weren't convinced. They obtained Dennis's cell phone records. On the morning before the murders, he made a call to a man named Stuart Dillard. Investigators were anxious to speak with him.
Well, we're detectives with the man. We appreciate your cooperation.
They met with Stuart. He was extremely nervous. He, of course, saw the murder on the news and was able to put it together that he lent this sawed-off shotgun to LeBron Dennis, and he suspected that the sawed-off shotgun was possibly used in some criminal act.
Stuart Dillard said that on April 14th, one day after the murders, Dennis called him again and told him where to retrieve his shotgun and duffel bag. Inside, Stuart found a large folding knife that was not his, and several articles of clothing. When he looked at his shotgun, Stuart noticed that the wooden forend was missing.
He became very afraid of what had happened. He put some things together in his mind, and he thought that he would be culpable or somehow involved.
Stuart told investigators he disposed of the clothing in a dumpster and had thrown the knife and shotgun down a storm drain. All he kept was the duffel bag. Investigators took possession of it, hoping they could tie it directly to LeBron Dennis.
When we first started speaking to Stuart, we were apprehensive about what he was telling us because he did admit that he lent the potential murder weapon to LeBron Dennis. So we did investigate thoroughly what he had to tell us, and we believe what he was telling us was the truth, that he unknowingly lent this firearm to LeBron Dennis.
Miami-Dade police went to the storm drain and found the discarded weapons, exactly where Stuart said they would be. They retrieved the knife and the shotgun. The weapons were bagged for analysis. Armed with this new evidence, the investigation of LeBron Dennis intensified. Police interviewed his known acquaintances. Jamie Meyer was a former girlfriend. She admitted that she often loaned her car to Dennis. Police saw that her car resembled the suspicious vehicle seen on the night of the murders. An officer photographed the car. The vehicle had no rear license plate, like the vehicle described by the clerk at the gas station. Investigators re-interviewed the gas station clerk.
showed the photographs of her car to the clerk, and she positively identified that as being the same car she saw that evening.
Police had established another connection between LeBron Dennis and the car, but it was highly circumstantial. To link him to the murders, they turned to the forensic evidence. They were confident that the bag had been used to carry the murder weapons. The duffel bag, turned over by Dennis's friend Stewart, was examined by criminalist Toby Wolson. Wolson found what appeared to be droplets of dried blood inside the bag.
I was asked to do the DNA interpretation of samples taken from a duffel bag, and we did analysis of those and compared those samples to the standards from the victim and the subject.
Wolson found a match between the blood in the duffel bag and the blood of one of the victims.
The DNA profiles obtained from the samples from the bag match the DNA profiles obtained from Marlon Barnes' bloodstain standard, which means that those samples came from Marlon Barnes.
Piece by piece, Miami authorities were building their case against LeBron Dennis. Criminalists had evidence connecting Dennis's gym bag to one of the victims, but it would take more than a bloodstain to charge LeBron Dennis with murder. The murders of University of Miami student Marlon Barnes and his childhood friend Tim Juanita Lumpkins were close to being solved. A wealth of evidence, including a knife and a shotgun, had been discovered. But so far, nothing tied the gruesome double murder directly to ex-boyfriend LeBron Dennis. Miami-Dade criminalist Thomas Quirk examined the flat tire from the car Barnes had driven the night before he was killed.
I noted that the tire had a very curious V-shaped mark. Once I received the knife and examined the knife, I realized that the tip of the knife was bent and it was very dull. If this was a knife that made the marks, my job would be now to stab the tire with that knife and see if I could reproduce those V-shaped marks.
Quirk analyzed the test cuts against the punctures from the night of the crime. He found the two sets of punctures to be wholly consistent, concluding that Dennis's knife was used to slash the victim's tires. Quirk also examined the shotgun found in the storm drain. He compared wood splinters collected at the crime scene to the now bare forend of the shotgun.
It's no different than building an airplane or building a model car. You take the pieces, you look at them, you notice the fracture patterns to them, the manufacturer's markings, and you simply place them together and make a little mold out of it. And we found that once we did that, it fit perfectly into the frame of the shotgun. The chances are that this shotgun was used to bludgeon the two victims to death.
In addition to the wood splitters, they also collected metal fragments at the crime scene. Criminalist George Borghi examined the fragments.
At the time that the pieces of metal were found, they were unknown in terms of what the origin was. When the shotgun was recovered and they put all the pieces together, it was obvious from my perspective that there was a broken trigger guard, and the two pieces of metal looked like they could be fragments of metal from the trigger guard themselves.
But to prove an exact match between the metal fragments and the trigger guard would require more than the appearance of a close fit.
The molecular structure and the atomic structure of the metal particles are what give it the unique fracture pattern. Not only are the edges compared to show that the edges line up perfectly, in this situation it's a three-dimensional fracture. So besides the edges comparing favorably, the interior fractures compare favorably, meaning that every contoured edge of one piece fit within the contours of the adjoining piece and of the shotgun. So therefore, the combination of all those characteristics exclude the possibility that those trigger guard pieces came from any other weapon besides that one.
With this evidence, investigators now had probable cause. They charged LeBron Dennis with the murders of Timwanika Lumpkins and Marlon Barnes. But to prove his guilt, police needed direct physical evidence. They once again turned to medical examiner Dr. Sam Galino. Galino had previously noted peculiar L and T-shaped wounds sustained by the victims. Galino compared the evidence to diagrams of the victims' injuries.
And we were able to compare different aspects of the shotgun to the wounds, and indeed found out that different aspects of the shotgun matched to a great degree of certainty the wounds that were on both of the bodies. I was able to conclude that this shotgun had been used to beat both Marlon Barnes and Timwanika Lumpkins.
LeBron Dennis continued to profess his innocence despite the strong case against him. But Miami-Dade investigators had amassed a wealth of evidence supporting his guilt, and it had all started with a case of envy.
From the evidence that we were able to establish in this investigation, LeBron Dennis became extremely upset when he found out that Timwanika Lumpkins went to meet Marlon Barnes at this event that hosted many celebrity football players from the NFL and college.
Investigators were convinced that LeBron Dennis followed the victims to Marlon Barnes' apartment. When Barnes opened the door, Dennis struck him across the face. When Dennis finished attacking Barnes, he went after Timwanika. LeBron Dennis was tried and convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. LeBron Dennis's violent relationship with Timwanika Lumpkins led police to closely investigate him and ultimately solve the crime. But in some cases, there is no obvious suspect. Fresno, California is a quiet, peaceful city, known for its proximity to 3 national parks. On Friday, February 18, 2000, Nancy and Ralph Gower were making plans for the upcoming weekend.
Yeah, that's too much, sure.
Nancy was going to drive to their vacation home that evening.
So you're going to be real busy.
Ralph, who worked as an auto salesman, had to be at the dealership the following morning, but planned to drive up Saturday afternoon. The Gowers had been married for 12 years.
I can't wait.
That night, Nancy drove alone to their vacation house. The next morning, Ralph failed to show up for work. His concerned employer went to his house to check on him. But when she peered through the window, she saw him lying on the floor. Panicked, she tried to get Ralph's attention, but he wasn't moving. She called 911. Fresno police detectives Darrell Green and Al Murrieta responded. An emergency response team had already forced entry into the residence and pronounced the victim dead at the scene.
Take that side out. There it is.
2 bullet wounds marked the right side of his chest, but there were no shell casings present. The area immediately around the body seemed unusually clean, but detectives noted a small amount of blood under the sofa, perhaps overlooked by the killer.
Here originally, some of that dust here, there's something that either moved or broken, the stuff underneath the tape. Something's not right, the couch has been moved.
It appeared the furniture had been moved.
What initially stood out to the investigators is that we could tell that the couch had been moved and that the scene was extremely clean, indicating that someone had cleaned up the crime scene and moved furniture after the victim had been shot.
Crime scene investigators took photographs and meticulously dusted surfaces for fingerprints. Broken items on the coffee table suggested a struggle had taken place. In the entryway, investigators found a gym bag. Inside the bag was a loaded revolver.
Provide us with a serial number and property receipts when we check.
Detectives searched the house for signs of a break-in. There were none. The automatic garage door mechanism had been shut off. The door could now be opened by hand.
No, I just checked that first drawer. What's in that bag? I haven't checked it.
The detectives found more weapons in the garage. The assortment of firearms, along with the revolver found in the house, would be sent to a lab for ballistics tests. Detective Murrieta needed to contact the victim's wife.
I'm formulating questions in my mind. First of all, establishing where was she at the time that we believe the murder actually took place, who could alibi for her, and one other striking thing that I needed to clear up, who else had keys to that residence?
While the Fresno police pursued the investigation, Ralph Gower's body was autopsied. The pathologist would make further curious findings. Cause of death was attributed to the 2 bullet wounds to the chest. But pathologist Vinu Gopal noted something more.
At the autopsy, I found evidence of blunt trauma and gunshot wounds to the chest and injuries to the wrist. These injuries were consistent with handcuff injuries.
It appeared that Ralph Gower had been shackled to something before he was shot.
So we have handcuff injuries and somebody's laying on his back. Next thing you always think of, is it some sort of an execution style killing?
Police reached Nancy Gower and informed her of her husband's death. She was shaken by the news and cooperated with the investigation.
Can you tell me where you were Friday night?
The last time she saw her husband was the previous evening, just before she left for the vacation home. She expected Ralph to join her after he finished work, but he never showed up. Detective Green got a sense of Nancy and Ralph's marriage.
What we found was they were the all-American couple And from talking to people who worked with both Nancy and Ralph, they were well liked and they seemed to be madly in love with each other.
Chance. Well, Nancy, we're going to be needing to talk again, and we'll update you as we get the information. We're still in the early process of the investigation. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Everything that could potentially be a reason for the homicide was discredited, including any financial problems, any problems at work, anything that she thought could have been related, we were able to discredit.
The guns found at the crime scene were sent to the Fresno Crime Lab for testing. Criminalist Iqbal Sikhan tested bullets fired from the gun and compared them against the slugs retrieved from the victim. There were no matches, but characteristics of the slugs led Sikhan to the first clue of the killer's identity. He or she had used a .40 caliber firearm. But as the days passed, investigators had yet to develop a motive or suspect. They felt they had only one place to turn.
We felt our only option was to bring Nancy in and go deeper into their personal life, including giving her a polygraph to verify some of her earlier statements.
Nancy Gower had cooperated through the entire investigation of her husband's murder.
And we need to eliminate the suspect once we do that.
But to investigators, it seemed as if she had something to hide. In Fresno, California, police were investigating the murder of luxury auto salesman Ralph Gower. With no leads in the case, they asked Gower's wife Nancy to take a polygraph exam. She agreed, but just as the test was to begin, she wouldn't continue.
We've got a little bit of a problem, so I'm going to take the test and give some possibilities.
She asked to speak with the investigators.
Hi.
I understand you wanted to talk to us for a minute.
Yeah, I really think I should tell you something.
She made a stunning admission to Detective Green.
So we started having this.
The bombshell in this case was that Nancy indicated that she was having an affair with one of our police officers. Not only was he a police officer, but prior to coming onto the department, he had been a full-time minister and in fact was a chaplain with the Fresno Police Department, one of our own.
The officer's name was Paul Hurth. Nancy told the detectives that she and Hurth had been involved for several months, but she said she recently ended the affair. Hurth couldn't accept the breakup and continued calling her.
He's also a Baptist minister, so I didn't want anybody.
Investigators now faced the possibility of a killer in their ranks. After Nancy's admission, she took the polygraph and passed.
Get a question about
An internal committee was formed to investigate.
We knew we had to hurry on this case. If a police officer was a suspect and we were allowing an officer to continue to work and he was a murder suspect, speed was of the utmost.
Police checked the staff sign-in sheet for the night of Ralph's murder.
Is there any indication they were supposed to work that night?
No, should have been regular day off.
According to the sheet, Officer Hurth and his partner were on duty during the time in question.
Thanks.
When investigators spoke with Hurth's partner, he said that he had not worked that night and had not initialed the sign-out sheet. It appeared Officer Hurth was attempting a cover-up. Police called him in for questioning.
I want to talk to you about the death of Ralph Gower occurred about a week ago. Actually, I was expecting a call from Roy. Hey, look, I didn't do it.
Kurtz was forthcoming about the affair, but denied committing any crime.
I may have broke some police rules, but again, I didn't murder him. Okay, well, that's kind of what we thought. We were wondering if maybe you couldn't fill us in a little bit. Were you working February 18th? Yes. Oh, you were? Yeah, I was on patrol at a college
He
campus,
stated that he had been on patrol on the 18th.
and I broke up the fight. You were
They asked about his partner.
Partner that night? It was Officer Andre Benson. So he was working? No, I signed it. Oh, he didn't show up. I signed it, but he didn't show up. Okay, we look in your locker.
When they asked Kurtz if they could search his house and his work locker, he agreed.
That'd be okay. Okay, good. Let's go down to let's go out this way and take a look at.
They took his police-issued equipment along with his uniform. Inside the officer's home, investigators located his service weapon. It was a .40 caliber Beretta, the same caliber gun used in the killing of Ralph Gower. Criminalists Iqbal Sikhan and Gary Kortner received Kurtz's weapon. The gun was fired into a sealed water tank. Fired slugs from Hurt's pistol would be compared to the slugs that killed Ralph Gower. Police waited anxiously for results to see if the gun used to uphold the law would be the same weapon used to break it. Fresno police were investigating fellow officer Paul Hurth. They believed he had murdered the husband of his former lover, Nancy Gower. Criminalist Iqbal Sikhan performed a side-by-side comparison of slugs fired from Officer Hurth's handgun and the bullets that killed Ralph Gower. Sikhan looked at several class characteristics, including the caliber, the direction of the twist, and the lands and grooves of the slugs. The results pointed directly at the suspect.
The bullets that killed the victim came out of Paul Hurt's duty pistol.
Paul Hurth was arrested for the murder of Ralph Gower. When he was confronted with the evidence, he quickly changed his story. Officer Hurth now claimed he went to the Gower house with the sole intention of apologizing for his indiscretions with Ralph's wife. When Hurth told him about the affair, he became enraged and attacked the officer. He said during the struggle, Ralph got control of his baton. He said he went into police mode and drew his gun. After shooting Ralph twice, he panicked and proceeded to clean up the room. Finally, he let himself out through the garage and returned to work. Kurtz's claim of shooting Ralph Gower in self-defense rang hollow with investigators. To test the officer's story, they re-examined the crime scene reports. They believed the angle of the bullet wounds to Gower's chest proved he'd been shot from above at a distance of 2 feet while lying defenseless on the floor. Investigators returned to the Gower house.
6:53. He was on the ground at that time. Okay. Yeah. Let's see if there is any evidence of any damage.
They scoured the crime scene for any indication of bullet damage to the walls. If the victim had been standing, as Firth claimed, the bullets would have passed through his body and there would be damage to the walls. But there was none.
Possible scenario is that the victim was.
All the crime scene evidence supported the case that Officer Hurt was standing over the victim when he fired. Despite convincing evidence, prosecutors know juries are often reluctant to convict officers of the law. Fresno authorities turned to the FBI. Police enlisted the help of forensic profiler and criminalist Mark Safaric. As a special agent with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, Safaric studies crime scene photos and other evidence from individual cases. From the case materials, he developed a profile of the dynamics that took place between the victim and the assailant. His conclusions in the Gower case contradicted Paul Hurt's claims of self-defense.
I think both behaviorally and forensically, it's clear that Gower was not in a position to present a threat to Hurt. There's no indication his hands were in front of his face or attempting to ward off the potential of being shot. And the fact that the gunshot wounds are so close together, almost directly over the heart area, tells me that he was likely unconscious at the time he was shot.
Based on the evidence, police believe that Paul Hurth went to Ralph Gower's house with no other intention but to kill him. Nancy Gower had ended the affair, and he needed to dispose of his rival. Investigators believe Hurth struck Gower with his baton, then proceeded to handcuff him to a table leg before shooting him twice in the chest. Investigators concluded that Paul Hurth acted alone, and Nancy had no knowledge of his intentions. Paul Hurth was convicted of aggravated manslaughter for the death of Ralph Gower. He was sentenced to 20 years. Killers commit their crimes for many reasons. But when they are driven by dark emotion, they unwittingly leave behind a history of clues. Forensic science exploits these clues to uncover hard evidence and solve crimes of passion.
A guy came crawling through a window out of nowhere. She woke, and she sat up in bed and looked at him. And he looked back at her, and he went like this.
Man, I want to get this guy so bad because he's out here killing people. And now it's personal. I gotta catch him.
Short, mid-50s man gets a gun stuck in his face. He's able to disarm the guy and fire the gun. I'm a trained professional and I couldn't do that.
I look over at the car and this guy's burnt. He's a crispy critter. We're not going anywhere with this case. We might as well wrap it up right now. I'm going. This is a loser.
The detective schedule's horrible. You work 2 nights and 2 days back to back. 4 days on, 2 days off.
So one day my boss approaches me and says, "Hey, we need somebody to investigate the burglaries." And I said, well, "There's nothing really to them, a lot of them are dead ends. And he said, "Well, if you can make it work for you, I'm open to suggestions." So I said, "Well, if you give me Monday through Friday with Saturday and Sunday off, I'll do them." And one thing I learned is there's only X amount of burglars out in your precinct, and you have to keep an eye on them because there's patterns. The same guy may be doing 2 or 3 different burglaries a month, and you got to try and identify those patterns, and that's what I was good at. I had no pattern that impersonated the Spider-Man burglar. It was the Upper West Side of Manhattan where I worked. He concentrated on brownstone apartment buildings. This guy would get into apartments while you're asleep. A lot of the windows were up in the middle of nowhere. 4th, 5th floor windows, no fire escapes. Maybe a cable wire or a drain pipe outside the window. This guy was getting in. Nobody knew how. I come in and I get a call of a burglary on 88th and Central Park West. He had a 2-level penthouse. Turned out the alarm went off in the middle of the night. He went to see what it was, and he found patio doors had been opened up, and a stroller that was in front of those patio doors was moved across the room. So he knew somebody had been in there. He called 911. The patrol units responded, and they didn't find anything. Later on that day, I get another call that there was a home attendant home with an older gentleman. She said a guy came crawling through the window out of nowhere. While she was asleep, she woke, and she sat up in bed and looked at him. And he looked back at her, and he went like this. And she said she laid back down, put the covers over her head, and this was like 4 in the morning. She said she didn't take the covers off till 7 in the morning. And naturally, when they got up, they realized that there was some property missing, and that was in the same building as the penthouse. I think it was a night or 2 later, he went back to the penthouse again, and the penthouse got hit for a second time. And we couldn't understand how we was getting to this penthouse, because the only way to get to it was a fire escape, but in front of the fire escape was a wrought iron fence with razor wire over it. After a few of these burglaries happened, we decided to put together a task force. And now I'm back working midnight to 8 in the morning trying to catch this guy because that's when he's hit. We have uniformed patrol units out, and we also have a group of detectives and burglary officers staying on rooftops, looking down, looking in back alleys, trying to catch somebody coming up a fire escape or whatever. So one night we're on a stakeout, we're over on 88th Street. All of a sudden, over the radio comes an alarm. And the alarm was for a building right around the corner from us. We go running over there. All the patrol units come shooting out. There's probably 20 police cars on the block. This is what we were waiting for. Surround the block, and we figured we get this guy somewhere. We get there, and the owners of the apartment, man and woman, they come out. They tell us the story. The alarm went off on the top floor. Their bedroom was on the 2nd floor. They said that the husband read the baseball bat. And he went up the steps. And as he got up to the loft area, he saw the bathroom door close and watched the handle lock. And he said that's when he knew somebody was definitely in the house. And he went running downstairs, grabs his wife, and runs out of the apartment, locking the door behind them. So now they're locked out. Emergency services comes with their tools. They take the door. They go up. They do a search. I think we had a canine unit with us too at that time. Canine goes right to the bathroom door. The bathroom door's still locked. Now we're banging on the door, telling them, listen, open the door, come out. We go to the roof and we look down and we see the window. The window's open, but it's in the middle of nowhere. Nothing near it. It's got to be 20 feet down from the roof and 75 feet down to the ground. We tell the guy, we know you're in there. Come out and open the door. Nothing, not a sound, not a peep. We get emergency service. They come with their shotguns. They break the door down. The bathroom's empty. The window's half open. We call up the print unit. They come. They get a good fingerprint. We kept that in our file, and we knew at some time it was going to help us out. A couple of days goes by. we get a call, and the gentleman says, burglary in progress. He comes home, and there he sees this guy, who is Spider-Man, in his clothes. He's in the guy's clothes, and he motioned to me to go outside, and I'm going to leave through the window. He goes, and that's what I did. He goes, I back out my apartment door. I went to the neighbor, called 911, and then I came back in, and the cops came, and he was gone. Now we have somebody that can ID this guy, and we were able to lift fingerprints at that scene also. So now we've started to build a pretty good case. Once this guy gets caught, we know we're going to get him good. Maybe 2 or 3 burglaries down the line, he hit a nice 3 or 4 level brownstone. Spider-Man had got in there when they were away over the weekend. It looked like he had spent some time in there. He drank up all their apple juice, and he took all their vitamins. So at that point, we knew we were looking for a guy that was in good shape, probably a health nut. I come into work, and my captain calls me up, and he says, go down to Midtown North Precinct. I got to the Midtown North Precinct, and I spoke to the arresting officers. And I asked them what happened. And they said, well, you got a call for a burglary in an office. And there was an alarm. He said, we got to the building. The alarm company was with us. And lo and behold, here's this guy sitting 3 stories up. This guy jumps out the window. He goes down 2 stories to a roof landing. He lands on that, and he screams in pain, grabbing his leg. So with that, we figure he's done. Next thing you know, he jumps up, gets to the edge of the roof landing, and he jumps over that down to the ground, another story. And he takes off down the block. By then, they had radioed other cars in the area, and he was apprehended running down the block. As soon as I look at him, I can tell this guy's built with V-back, cut up chest, cut up arms. So I sit down with the guy, and I talk to him for a while. I don't ask him anything about any burglaries, just we chew the fat for a while. Why is he in such good shape? And he tells me, oh, I'm a personal trainer. I said, oh, really? He goes, yeah, personal trainer on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I do all famous people. We get into the interview room.
We got you. Write it down.
We ended up getting 8 or 10 confessions out of him. One of the things I had to know was, how did you get over the fence to the fire escape for that one building? And he says, I put my feet on one wall, my hands on the other building, and I went foot and hand up the wall, and then over the barbed wire, and then up to the fire escape. And that's how we made it over the barbed wire fence. We also brought him in for a lineup, and the gentleman picked him out, and nothing flat. We went to trial on that. He didn't do too well. I think he got 20 to life. Turned out he was a drug addict, and I think he kind of, in a way, was looking for help, and he knew that this was the end of the line. Maybe he felt he would get some help out of this. I don't think he thought he was going to get 20 years, though. I guess at the end, Spider-Man got caught in Detective Clancy's web, and that was the end of his burglary career.